Every agreement of purchase and sale is unique. The property, the buyer, the seller, the circumstances, all of it shapes what needs to be in that contract to properly protect the parties. But there are a few clauses that I call logistic clauses that should be in virtually every offer, whether it's a freehold property or a condo. And if they're not in there can be issues at closing. Now, before I was a lawyer, I was a licensed realtor, so I've been on both sides of the table, the drafting side, and now more on the reviewing side. That perspective shapes everything about how I look at an offer. So whether you're a buyer or a realtor writing offers, these three clauses are the difference between a smooth closing and a stressful one. My name is Soccio-Marandola. I'm a lawyer here in Toronto, and I help people like you close real estate deals every single day. Now, if you enjoy this type of content, make sure you subscribe and join our community. And if you have a closing coming up, we've built the most transparent legal fee calculator online. It gives you a full breakdown of every dollar you'll spend and even calculates closing costs like land transfer tax and title insurance. That's linked in the description below. Now, before we get into the three clauses, I want to explain what I mean when I say logistic clauses. Now, these are not conditions. A condition is something that determines whether the deal happens at all. So a financing condition, home inspection, status certificate condition, those are about the deal proceeding. Logistic clauses are different. They assume the deal is happening. They're about making sure that closing day goes smoothly, that the buyer walks into that property, and everything is as it should be. And that distinction matters because a lot of buyers and realtors focus heavily on the conditions, which is right, but then don't give enough thought to the little clauses that help keep things moving smoothly. So I'm going to walk through these three logistic clauses today and why they're important. So the first one is the good working order clause. Now, here's what most people don't realize. The default language in the agreement of purchase and sale says that chattels and fixtures included in the purchase are free from all liens and encumbrances. That's the baseline protection, but it doesn't say anything about whether the appliances actually function on closing day. The law treats that to be an as-is condition in the absence of that additional language. So I always recommend adding a good working order clause. What this does is create an explicit obligation on the seller to ensure that the included chattels, primarily the appliances being sold, are in good working order on the closing date. And that's because without it, you close and find out that the dishwasher doesn't work or the stove element is broken, and you have very little legal ground to stand on. With that clause in place, you have a contractual obligation that you can point to. Now, the language for this clause looks something like this. So the clause you're looking at is up here. The seller represents and warrants that the chattels and fixtures as included in this agreement, purchase and sale, will be in good working order and free from all liens and encumbrances on completion. The seller further represents and warrants that all fixtures and chattels included in this agreement may not be substituted. This line isn't always in the common draft that I see, but I've had a few realtors include it and I kind of really like it. So again, it's just that extra little bit, making sure that, hey, nothing's being changed out. What we saw when we made the offer is going to stay. Now lastly, and this part's important, the parties agree that this representation and warranty shall survive and not merge on completion of this transaction, but apply only to the state of the property at the completion of this transaction. What that means that just because you've actually closed the deal doesn't mean that this representation doesn't carry over. So if you moved in on closing day and there was an issue, as long as you can show that it was, on that day, the appliance wasn't actually working, that you still have the contractual right to enforce this clause. Now, the second logistic clause is a buyer visit clause. Now, depending on how long the gap is between when the agreement was signed and the actual closing date, you may want 2 or 3 visits built into the contract where the buyer is allowed to view the property. Now, this isn't always top of mind when an offer is being written, but think about it from a buyer's perspective. They saw the property once, maybe twice before the offer, then the deal firms up, and they might not see it again until closing day. A lot can happen in that window. Sellers move out, appliances get taken that maybe were supposed to stay, there's new damage in the property that wasn't there before. So I always recommend including buyer visit clauses, and the strategic move here is to save one of those visits for as close to closing day as possible, right? The day before, if you can, then that final visit essentially becomes a pre-closing walkthrough. And if there's an issue, something broken, something's missing, the property isn't in the condition that it should be, you want to know about it before money changes hands, not after. Pre-closing, we can still try to get ahead of it. Post-closing, your options are a lot more limited and more expensive. Now, the language I use for a buyer visits clause looks something like this. So in addition to appraisals, insurance inspections, and home inspections, and this first part is really just to stop any of those really petty arguments where someone's saying, well, you already came in for this purpose or that purpose. We want to specifically say that these are separate viewings. The buyer may view the property on 3 occasions prior to completion. 3 is a common one I see, and 2 and 4 also come up, again, depending on timing, upon reasonable notice to the seller. Sometimes this says 24 hours, but upon reasonable notice is usually, as long as the parties are not trying to cause issues, usually is satisfactory to make sure everyone is on the same page. And then the last line just says the seller agrees to provide access to accommodate these visits. The third logistic clause is the Broom-Swept Condition one. Now this one is straightforward but important. It creates a clear obligation on the seller to deliver the property in a clean and presentable state on the day of closing. Now, broom-swept is a commonly used term in these kind of clauses. It basically means that the property should be cleared out and reasonably clean. Not pristine, but not a mess either, right? So debris removed, floor swept, the place left in a state that a reasonable buyer would expect. Now, in some situations, you can negotiate up from there. If the property is being sold at a price point where a professional cleaning is reasonable to expect, or if the seller has just agreed to it, you can specifically require that the seller hire a professional cleaner before closing. Now, that needs to be in the agreement explicitly. A vague reference to clean condition probably won't get you there. And that's because buyers often underestimate how much this matters until they show up on closing day to a property that hasn't been touched, right? The sellers have moved out, they may have left garbage behind, the buyer's walking through with their movers, and it just really creates a bad experience. So having this clause in writing gives you something to enforce. It sets that expectation early and puts it on the seller to meet it. So here's what the language for something like that could look like. So for this one, I've included two versions, and it's going to depend on what level of cleanliness you're actually looking for. So the most common one I see is this top one. The seller agrees to remove all personal belongings, chattels, not included in this agreement. So again, anything that's not supposed to be sold should be removed from the property so you don't have any extra hassle of having to remove these things. And debris from in and around the subject property on or before closing, and to leave the property in a clean and broom-swept condition. So that's kind of the standard language that a lot of agreements come with. Now, once in a while, I'll see something like this latter one. The seller agrees to remove all personal belongings, chattels not included in this agreement, and debris from in and around the subject property on or before closing, and to leave the property professionally cleaned, providing evidence of same in the form of a receipt or invoice to the buyer on or before closing. So basically saying that the level of cleanliness is now raised to a professionally clean manner, and you as a seller are going to be providing evidence to the buyer that the property was actually cleaned and a professional service was hired. So those are the three logistic clauses that I recommend: good working order, buyer visits, and broom-swept condition. Now, it's not an all-inclusive list, but these are good ones to always have in your agreement. None of them are complicated, none of them are controversial, but they belong in virtually every offer. And when they're missing, closing day is where you feel it. If you're enjoying these behind-the-scenes real estate law videos, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I post a new video every week. And if you're a realtor, I also send a weekly update about different legal situations that come up in our closings. That's our realtor newsletter, and you can subscribe to it with the link down in the description. Thanks for watching.